If you had told me, say, 5 years ago that one of the loudest voices in the Republican Party accusing Israel of genocide would be Marjorie Taylor Greene, I mean, I would have assumed you were hallucinating.
It would have sounded completely absurd, utterly impossible.
For years, the Make America Great Again script was, ironclad. It was simple.
All right.
You support Trump, and by extension, you offer this unwavering, almost religious support to Israel.
It was a package deal. Absolutely.
Sealed with evangelical fervor and that old neoconservative consensus. But then, recently the script just completely flipped.
It really did. And the breakup between Trump and Greene on November 15th, that was just the surface level drama.
Exactly. The real shock wasn't the political breakup. It was the bizarre, almost, disorienting rhetoric that surfaced right after.
Right. Suddenly you have this hard-right nationalist.
A very hard-right nationalist.
Using language that's usually reserved for, left-wing campus protests?
Yes. Framing the war in Gaza not as some holy crusade, but as a betrayal of American interests.
Yeah. The dissonance is just, it's palpable. On one side, you have the old guard, figures like Lindsey Graham.
Right.
And they're insisting that standing with Israel is a divine obligation, a pillar of Western civilization itself.
But then on the other side, you have this rising faction of America First isolationists.
And they're looking at the exact same alliance and asking a really cold, really transactional question.
What are we getting out of this?
That's it. To them, the images of war, they aren't a call to arms. They're proof that the U.S. is getting ripped off.
Ripped off. Funding foreign conflicts while, American infrastructure crumbles at home.
So this isn't just some petty squabble between politicians.
Not at all. It feels like a glitch in the matrix of American conservatism.
A huge one.
Because when the far right starts sounding eerily like the anti-war left, it signals that the fundamental DNA of the Republican Party is, it's mutating.
And that's what we're here to unpack. We are witnessing the start of a civil war. It's not over taxes or borders, but over the one pillar of foreign policy that used to be absolutely untouchable.
It's fascinating. And this conflict, as you said, has become the central flashpoint that is really defining the ideological future of the Republican Party itself.
It's a profoundly unexpected pivot point. Precisely because support for Israel has been the unquestioned bedrock policy of the modern GOP for, generations?
For as long as I can remember.
And when that foundation starts to crack, it tells you everything you need to know about the seismic shifts happening just beneath the surface of American politics.
Absolutely. And the ideological conflict at play here, it's not minor. It's a deep schism between two utterly different ways of viewing America's role in the world. A civil war, like we said, between the traditional Meguier camp, which is so often aligned with these deeply held religious beliefs,
and the newer, deeply skeptical, highly transactional America First nationalists.
We really need to unpack the mechanics of this mutation. Where do we even start?
I think to understand that mutation, you have to look at the trajectory of Marjorie Taylor Greene, MTG. She serves as a perfect symptom of the whole thing.
Okay, so how did she get from A to B?
Well, she initially rose as the ultimate Maguire loyalist, right? Her entire identity was just inseparable from Donald Trump's personality.
Her mandate was just to support him, channel that anti-establishment energy he unleashed.
Exactly. But the real insight, and this is crucial, it comes when she began to reshape herself. She's transitioned from being just a Trump proxy to defining herself as a pure America First nationalist.
So it's an effort to make the movement survive beyond Trump's individual political career.
That's it. She's trying to ground it in specific, permanent nationalist principles, not just one person's charisma.
And what are those core principles then? What does an America First nationalist prioritize?
It comes down to really three things. Physical borders, number one. The domestic economy, number two. And number three, non-entanglement in costly foreign conflicts.
So by definition, prioritizing, say, domestic infrastructure over international commitments makes any foreign alliance seem costly.
Any alliance, even a historically sacred one like the relationship with Israel, it suddenly gets put on the chopping block, or at least it's up for review.
And that is the crucial ideological turn. That's what forces her, and others like her, to use this kind of rhetoric, like the term genocide.
Even if it comes from the opposite end of the political spectrum.
Right. It's a mechanism. It serves a transactional purpose, which is to justify withdrawing that unconditional support.
It's the political equivalent of shouting fire in a crowded theater for the Republican establishment.
All in service of a nationalist critique of cost. It's about the bottom line.
It just clarifies the absolute divide. And I think we can define these two competing Republican factions really clearly based on their core motivation for engaging with Israel in the first place.
Okay, let's do that. Let's start with the old guard. This would be figures like House Speaker Mike Johnson, Senator Lindsey Graham. What defines their support?
Their support is really rooted in deeply entrenched faith and a sense of historical continuity. For them, backing Israel is a divine obligation.
A divine obligation. That's a strong phrase.
It is. And this position is driven so heavily by Christian Zionism, which is not merely political support, it's a theological mandate.
Can you elaborate on that? Because I think for many people listening, that connection might sound a little abstract. What makes support for Israel so non-negotiable for this evangelical base?
It is entirely tied to eschatology.
The beliefs about the end times.
Exactly. Christian Zionists believe that the ingathering of the Jewish people to Israel, and especially their control of Jerusalem, is a prerequisite for the fulfillment of biblical prophecy and the second coming of Christ.
So in their view, supporting Israel's security and its territorial claims isn't just good foreign policy.
No, it's actively cooperating with God's plan. Their message is intensely moral, it's emotional, it completely transcends strategic benefit.
It's a matter of faith and destiny.
It is. So to question aid to Israel, in their view, is kind of like questioning a pillar of Western civilization and defying prophecy itself. You just don't do it.
So, okay, when the old guard sees conflict in the region, they're seeing a civilizational or biblical struggle, one that demands unwavering support, no matter the cost, no matter the immediate strategic benefit to the U.S.
Correct. This perspective requires zero accounting. The books don't need to be balanced.
Now, contrast that with the rising America First nationalists. We're talking Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon, MTG, and J.D. Vance, who we're definitely going to get to later.
Their lens is the complete opposite. It is purely cold and transactional. They are asking the ultimate accounting question.
Does unconditional support for Israel actually serve American interests?
And here's where it gets really interesting, because the whole argument isn't about theology anymore. It's about the budget.
Right. They apply the same critical, highly skeptical logic they use against funding Ukraine.
Exactly. The idea that it's a distraction and a massive drain on resources, they apply that logic directly to aid for Israel.
The comparison is really essential to their argument, isn't it?
It is. They argue that sending billions of dollars overseas to any recipient is inherently contrary to their core principle of economic protectionism and, domestic revival.
They look at the current infrastructure bill, or just the state of American roads and bridges, and they see a financial betrayal.
To them, every single dollar sent abroad is a dollar not fixing a bridge that's collapsing in Ohio or not improving schools in their own district.
That really humanizes the ideology for their base. It shifts the entire debate from whose side are we on to are we being fiscally responsible to our own constituents?
And their skepticism is fueled by this intense distrust of what they call the foreign policy establishment.
Right. That's not just a political term for them. It's the boogeyman of the nationalist right.
It really is. They see this massive interconnected network of defense contractors, lobbying groups like AIPAC, and think tanks that profits immensely from continuous foreign conflicts and these long-term alliances.
So can you elaborate on why they see this establishment as an enemy? What are the mechanisms they accuse them of using?
Well, the critique really centers on the concept of the revolving door.
Okay.
They argue that you have government officials who retire from public service from the Pentagon or the State Department, and they immediately take these high-paying jobs with defense contractors or think tanks or foreign lobby groups.
And that creates an institutional incentive for perpetual war.
Exactly. An incentive for continuous foreign spending. They claim the entire system is just engineered to ensure that conflicts never truly end because peace is bad for business.
So for the nationalist, foreign aid isn't about helping allies.
No. It's a systemic drain that benefits only Washington insiders, the defense industry, and foreign powers who successfully influence policy. It is not for the American taxpayer.
It's presented as a corrupt, self-serving scam.
That's the narrative.
And that clarifies the absolute divide between the moral camp and the accounting camp. This whole struggle also marks the definitive end of the neoconservatism, right?
Yeah.
The ideology that dominated the George W. Bush era.
Oh, absolutely. The idea that the U.S. should pursue endless wars for the sake of global democracy and security.
That's over.
It truly is. Trump's rise in 2016 was a foundational revolt against that neoconservative consensus. You saw it in his attacks on the Iraq War and his promise of America first.
But Trump himself created a massive contradiction within his own movement.
He did.
How so?
Well, while he was using all this anti-interventionist rhetoric, he simultaneously cemented his loyalty to the traditional GOP power brokers and the evangelical base.
By implementing these cornerstone pro-Israel policies.
Right. Moving the embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing the Golan Heights, exiting the Iran deal, all the big ones.
And that left this huge ideological tension right at the heart of the Manji movement.
It's the central question. How can you be America first and yet maintain the decades-old, incredibly costly foreign policy commitment to Israel?
And now that tension is just exploding into this civil war we're talking about.
The struggle now is over whether the post-Trump GOP will define itself by his personality and his accommodation of the evangelical base, that's the Marjorie loyalists, or whether it fully embraces these new nationalist pillars.
Which are anti-interventionism, strict economic protectionism, and critically, this open skepticism of the financial influence and cost of the U.S.-Israel relationship.
This struggle over Israel is, it's essentially determining the fundamental DNA of the post-Trump Republican Party.
But this isn't just a squabble between politicians in Washington. I think to understand how profound this shift really is, we have to look at the electorate.
The consumers of this ideological shift.
Exactly. Because the data reveals that this mutation is already happening deep within the American public.
That's a perfect pivot. Let's transition into the empirical evidence, because the polling data isn't just interesting. It's genuinely shocking.
It demonstrates that the granite-solid consensus on Israel has basically vanished.
We're talking about a historic, rapid shift in national sympathy.
For decades, American public sympathy has consistently leaned heavily, sometimes overwhelmingly, toward Israel. That was just a given.
It was. However, the latest University of Maryland Critical Issues poll data from July-August 2025 shows a complete historical flip.
Okay, let's unpack this number. What does the data say now?
The most recent data indicates that for the first time, more Americans overall, that's 28%, now sympathize more with the Palestinians than with the Israelis.
Wow. And the Israelis?
They garner 22% sympathy. And another 26% say they sympathize equally with both sides.
So the net historical advantage that Israel enjoyed in American public opinion is, for all intents and purposes, gone.
It's gone. And the speed is what's just astonishing. It wasn't that long ago, February 2024, that a Pew poll showed 31% of Americans sympathized with Israelis compared to only 16% who sympathized with Palestinians.
So in less than 2 years, the trend line hasn't just shifted, it has completely inverted. What is causing this rapid erosion of the traditional viewpoint?
Well, there are multiple factors driving this, but a massive part of it is the generational shift, coupled with changing media consumption habits.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Younger generations, and this is regardless of their political affiliation, they are accessing unfiltered, immediate, and often deeply emotional images of the conflict directly.
Through social media.
Through platforms like TikTok, they're completely bypassing the traditional filter and context that was provided by, say, cable news or establishment media outlets that historically leaned pro-Israel.
That makes a lot of sense. If you are consuming a conflict through these short visual clips rather than, long-form political analysis, the moral and humanitarian argument often becomes instantly more compelling.
Irrespective of the geopolitical context, precisely. And if we break down the demographics, the generational divide is a chasm. It's swallowing the old consensus whole.
So let's look at younger Americans, those aged 18 to 34.
This group is massively skewed. 37% sympathize with Palestinians, compared to only 11% who sympathize with Israelis.
A 3-to-1 difference. Favoring Palestinians among young adults? This is the future electorate.
And they are starting their political journey with a fundamentally different view of this alliance than their parents or their grandparents ever had.
This has to raise an important question for politicians who are trying to maintain the status quo. How can the traditional, unwavering political support last if the future voting base is this skeptical?
And, as we discussed, this generational rift isn't just happening outside the GOP. It is tearing the Republican Party apart from the inside.
So let's drill down into that Republican generational rift, because this is the concrete evidence of that internal civil war we've been talking about. We need to measure the difference between the old guard and the new nationalists right there in the voting booth.
And the differences are truly staggering. Older Republicans, those come 5 and older, they largely maintain the traditional party line. 52% of them sympathize more with Israelis.
That's the classic GOP consensus holding strong.
It is. But amongst younger Republicans, those 18 to 34, what do you think that figure is?
Based on the trend, it has to be way lower.
That number plummets to a mere 24%.
24%.
You have a 28 percentage point difference within the same party. It's a massive generational break. This younger wing of the GOP isn't just less supportive. They are actively disassociating from the historical or the theological arguments for unconditional support.
So why is this gap so immense among young Republicans? Is it purely that transactional argument we talked about, or is there more at play?
I think it's multifaceted. First, you have to remember they carry the fatigue of the post-9/11 endless wars.
They grew up seeing America constantly entangled in the Middle East, Afghanistan, Iraq.
And they view those commitments as failures, costly in both blood and treasure. Second, the transactional argument about debt and infrastructure resonates powerfully with a generation that's facing enormous student loan debt and housing crises.
So they see foreign aid not as a strategic asset, but as pure fiscal waste.
Right. And third, they too are accessing information differently. They're far less reliant on traditional evangelical or conservative news outlets that consistently frame the issue through that lens of divine obligation.
And if the May-GA faction relies so heavily on that evangelical cornerstone, this polling suggests that foundation is just crumbling under the weight of this generational shift.
Absolutely. The religious foundation is visibly weakening. There was a significant study commissioned by UNC Pembroke, and it found that support for Israel among young evangelicals, a supposed core demographic, it dropped dramatically.
How dramatically?
From 75% in 2018 to just 34% in 2021.
Wow. From 3/4 to about 1/3.
In just 3 years. This shows that the divine obligation argument is just not sustainable for the long term. The next wave of conservative voters is significantly more secular, or at least more skeptical, in its foreign policy alignment.
And this skepticism, it must extend beyond mere sympathy. It affects how they define the conflict itself. Which brings us back to MTG's controversial rhetoric.
It does. How are Americans responding to the terminology being used to describe the military actions in Gaza?
What does the data say?
The shift in terminology is remarkable. Overall, a striking 41% of Americans now view Israeli military actions in Gaza as either genocide, that's 22%, or akin to genocide, which is 19%.
41%.
And only 22% overall see the actions as justified actions under the right to self-defense.
And that perception of unjustified or even criminal action has grown substantially.
It has. It's up from 23% defining the actions as genocide or akin to genocide just a year prior.
That jump is what should be setting off alarm bells in the traditional establishment. And again, I'm guessing the gap between young and old Republicans is the most telling metric here.
It is the ultimate litmus test of this civil war. Among Republicans 35 and older, 52% maintain that traditional line. They say the actions are justified under self-defense.
The majority holding the consensus.
Yes. But among Republicans under 35, only 22% say those actions are justified.
There's that almost 3-to-1 split again.
It's a consistent pattern. When nearly 4/5 of your young base believes the actions are not justified, you don't have a minor disagreement. You have an existential internal crisis brewing.
I think the final nail in the coffin for this untouchable pillar narrative is the perception of U.S. policy itself. The whole America First argument is rooted in this transactional idea that we're being played.
Yet our support is enabling costly foreign actions.
So does the general public agree with that? Does U.S. support enable Israeli actions?
Overwhelmingly, yes. A large majority of Americans, 61%, believe U.S. military, economic, and diplomatic support enables Israeli actions in Gaza.
61%.
That includes 34% who strongly believe this, and another 27% who somewhat believe it. But what's truly remarkable is how this consensus just crosses the partisan aisle.
Wait, so you're telling me a majority of Republicans agree with this idea that U.S. policy is enabling foreign military actions?
That's right. That's not a fringe belief.
It's the center of the party saying we are directly implicated.
Exactly. 57% of Republicans, 72% of Democrats, and 63% of independents all agree that U.S. support enables those actions.
This gives colossal intellectual and popular ammunition to the America First faction.
It does. They can now argue, with broad public support, that U.S. policy is actively participating in actions that a large minority, that 41%, view as extremely egregious.
So the nationalist wing can successfully frame unconditional support as a policy that both bankrupts America and implicates America in controversial foreign conflicts. It's a two-pronged attack.
A very effective one.
So if the policy is enabling conflict, then who does the public believe the policy is actually benefiting?
This is the core transactional outcome. Only 1/3, 33% of Americans believe U.S. policy in the Middle East mostly advances American interests.
Only a third. So where do they think the benefit is going?
In stark contrast, 25%, a full quarter of Americans believe it mostly advances Israeli interests.
And if we look at those younger Republicans again, the ones who are driving this ideological mutation, what do they believe?
This is, for me, the most stunning number. It represents a total ideological flip for a key demographic. Slightly more younger Republicans, those 18 to 34, say U.S. policy advances Israeli interests at 26%, than say it advances American interests at 24%.
Wow, so the core thesis of the America First movement, that the U.S. is prioritizing foreign interests over its own good, is not just resonating with younger Republicans.
They are actively believing it is true in this specific, historically untouchable case.
The polling data really provides the necessary empirical proof for the political rhetoric we're seeing. This isn't just manufactured outrage. It is tapping into a profound generational and financial skepticism about the costs and benefits of global engagement.
Which brings us to the political figure who is perhaps the most articulate and powerful architect of this new foreign policy blueprint, J.D. Vance.
Vance is the perfect case study. He really embodies the America First philosophy put into political action, and his stance on Israel is full of what appear to be calculated contradictions that perfectly fit that nationalist critique.
Transactional support, but strict anti-interventionism.
Right. His overall foreign policy approach is often labeled realist or even isolationist, right? Focusing American strength primarily on the domestic economy and confronting the main geopolitical threat in Asia.
Correct. Yet when it comes to the immediate war in Gaza, he has been a steadfast supporter of Israel, even backing U.S. funding for the conflict.
So how does he reconcile that with his very vocal anti-aid stance on Ukraine?
This is where we have to distinguish between pure isolationism and transactional nationalism.
Okay.
Pure isolationists would just stop all aid, period. Vance is a transactional nationalist. He supports the funding, arguing Israel should win and end the war as quickly as possible.
So he's not against the aid itself, but the management of it.
Exactly. He criticized the Biden administration for micromanaging Israel's war effort, and he alleged depriving Israel of precision-guided weapons.
So he wants the U.S. to ensure an Israeli victory, but he wants the U.S. entanglement to be swift, decisive, and temporary.
That's the key.
But is his support truly strategic, or is it maybe just a necessary compromise to avoid alienating the entire traditional GOP base?
That's an excellent point. His support is strategic in its stated aim, but it is perhaps politically hedged. Strategically, his argument is that a swift Israeli victory is necessary to achieve a larger goal.
And that is?
Forming a united front of Israel and Sunni Arab states against Iran. He views Israel as a useful, necessary regional partner against a larger threat.
So his involvement is defined by American strategic interests, not a blank check or a moral crusade. It's temporary financing for a geopolitical objective.
Precisely. And that focus on distinct American interests becomes explicitly clear when you look at his positions on other conflicts.
Like Ukraine.
Indeed. Vance is the loudest and most consistent critic of U.S. military aid to Ukraine. He's pushing for a negotiated peace and openly suggesting that Ukraine must accept ceding some territory to Russia.
He views that conflict as a resource drain and a distraction.
That's the narrative. It's clear. Ukraine is a long-term resource sink that doesn't serve immediate U.S. interests, but tactical aid to Israel, if it's strategic and limited, is acceptable because it counters Iran.
And he draws a firm, hard line against the greatest risk, which is escalation.
A very hard line.
Yeah.
He has been explicit that he would not support direct military action against Iran. He cites concerns about significant escalation.
He emphasizes that America's interest must remain distinct from Israel's, especially in avoiding a costly, unpredictable war.
Right. His quote, "Our interest, I think, very much is in not going to war with Iran," is a crucial departure from the old neoconservative playbook.
That old playbook often positioned the U.S. as a defender, willing to intervene directly to protect Israeli security, even if it meant conflict with major regional powers like Iran.
Vance is signaling a very hard nationalist limit to that commitment. this far and no further.
And if we connect this back to the grand strategy, Vance consistently calls China the biggest threat to the U.S.
All the time. He argues that wars in the Middle East and Eastern Europe are just distractions from this primary geopolitical focus.
And this reflects the total strategic pivot of the America First movement. It's about prioritizing U.S. resources and attention away from these long-term costly commitments in the Middle East and Europe.
And concentrating purely on economic and military competition in East Asia.
His personal history seems to fuel this skepticism as well. He's openly regretted his support for the Iraq War.
He says he realized he had been lied to by the foreign policy establishment.
That kind of background makes him inherently distrustful of any continuous foreign funding or engagement that's requested by that same establishment.
Absolutely. So when he publicly states that he wants the Israelis and the Sunnis to police their own region of the world, that just confirms the deeply skeptical, transactional nature of this new conservative faction.
It's the ideology we saw defined at the start. America is withdrawing from the role of global police.
And the expectation is that allies must become self-sufficient regional security anchors rather than relying on perpetual U.S. funding and military backing.
Which, in the nationalist view, only enriches Washington insiders anyway.
That's the core belief.
This shift is just seismic. It feels like the end of an era. So what are the broader strategic consequences of this Republican fragmentation for the Middle East and for U.S. global standing? If this cornerstone of American foreign policy is crumbling, who gains and who loses?
I think the fragmentation of the Republican Party, this internal civil war, creates a massive strategic opportunity for non-traditional actors to influence U.S. foreign policy.
Who are you talking about?
I'm talking specifically about Middle Eastern nations, Arab and Muslim communities, and pro-Palestinian advocates. They suddenly have a completely new angle of entry into U.S. political discourse.
That's a profound thought, because historically, influencing the GOP meant playing by the old guard's rules.
Right, focusing on formal diplomacy, security coordination, and, of course, anti-Iran sentiment.
So what is the new strategic opening that's being provided by the nationalist right?
The new opening is the shared interest. It's that skepticism toward endless military aid and intervention. Advocates can now engage the America First right, not through moral appeals about human rights, which historically fail with this demographic, but through the cold transactional logic of the movement itself.
So they could essentially walk in and say, we agree with you completely. Stop the unconditional support because it benefits neither Palestinians nor U.S. taxpayers. It's a waste of American resources.
Exactly. Advocates can stress that reducing unconditional support benefits U.S. taxpayers and global stability. They can argue it removes the financial burden and the perpetual conflict cycle that the foreign policy establishment thrives on.
They're now empowered to push U.S. politics toward a more balanced regional policy by aligning their goals with the domestic economic skepticism that is fueling the nationalist right.
It is a massive shift in how foreign actors must lobby and advocate in Washington. The old methods are becoming obsolete.
And this shift has major, maybe even existential implications for Israel as well. If the multi-generational bipartisan consensus supporting Israel is genuinely weakening, then Israel has to begin preparing for a future with less reliable, less unconditional U.S. support.
That reality is already being acknowledged by some in Israel. There was an Israeli opinion piece that suggested it is time for Israel to wean off American aid, stand on its own 2 feet.
Transitioning to what?
To an equal, independent strategic partnership with the U.S., rather than remaining in a client-state relationship that's perpetually reliant on subsidies and diplomatic protection.
That transition sounds necessary, not just desirable, especially given the rising isolationist sentiment we saw so clearly in the polling data among the U.S. political base.
It might be forced upon them, choice or not. If a significant faction of the next ruling party views foreign aid as a costly betrayal of American interests, then any reliance on that aid becomes highly precarious.
It becomes a political liability for both sides.
It does. The nationalist argument is gaining traction. Why should the U.S. spend billions subsidizing an ally who is perfectly capable of funding its own defense and economy, especially when domestic infrastructure is suffering?
This shift forces Israel to adapt its strategic posture and its relationship with Washington in a really fundamental way.
It's a whole new world.
So to synthesize this entire deep dive we've done today, the fight over Israel is not a minor political squabble between Trump and MTG. It reflects a fundamental historical reassessment of the U.S. global role.
Precisely. The once untouchable pillar of American foreign policy, unconditional support for Israel, has now become the central battleground defining the future of the Republican Party itself.
This fight determines whether the GOP commits to that old evangelical global engagement and neoconservative policies, or whether it fully embraces nationalism, isolation, and pure transactionalism.
And what's genuinely fascinating here is the surprising alignment of outcomes, despite wildly divergent motives.
Right. The far-right's anti-interventionism is driven by cost analysis and skepticism of the establishment's profitability,
While progressive criticism is driven by humanitarian and moral concerns. Both trajectories, however, land on the exact same conclusion: the need to end unconditional support.
And this confluence is being driven by that profound, undeniable generational shift we see in American public opinion.
It's the engine behind all of this.
For decades, supporting Israel defined a certain type of American political identity, especially on the religious and geopolitical right. Now, that identity is fracturing along generational and economic lines, forcing a debate not just about what we should do abroad, but who we are at home, and defining the answer in dollars and cents rather than divine destiny. The long, predictable path of American foreign policy has reached an unpredictable fork in the road.